you who were not in the morning session, welcome to the Arbor Vedanta Symposium Part 2. This part is going to be about, not specifically about Vedanta, but also about mental health and maybe the connections between the Vedantic perspective and Vedantic spiritual practice, and how do you deal with mental health issues like depression. So we have a fantastic set of speakers speaking in the afternoon session, just like the morning session. And I'll start by introducing our first speaker, Swami Chidbrahmananda. He's been studying Vedanta for nearly 20 years. He joined the Ramakrishna Order of Monks in 1999 after being introduced to the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, Sri Sharda Devi, and Swami Vivekananda in Kolkata, India. He spent the following 15 years serving Swami Prabodhananda, a senior monk of the order leading the San Francisco monastery. In 2012, he was asked to help with the work in Hollywood and was sent from there to serve at the Vedanta Center of Greater Washington, D.C. His current work involves a new free medical clinic at the Vedanta Center and traveling to many small groups, such as ours, around the country to support spiritual development. He's not a guru, but a spiritual cheerleader for those at the back of the line. Today, he's going to talk about ancient wisdom for modern therapies.
Okay, sure. Well, good afternoon. I see my time is up, so I'd like to conclude with a few closing words. I got these new glasses, they're progressives. I dispute that. So I'm going to go without them. As you know, I'm Swami C, Swami Chidbrahmananda. You can just use the first letter if you want. It's a lot easier for everybody involved. I have been in the Ramakrishna Order for just shy of 20 years. And in 2008, I was filling out a form for Kaiser Permanente online to get my online health diagnosis, welcome to Kaiser situation taken care of. And at the end of that, the form suggested that I talk to my general practitioner because I showed signs of moderate to severe depression. And thus began my quest to find out how the Vedanta was going to help me to deal with that, or if it could help me to deal with that. Because the psychiatrist that I went to see at the behest of my general practitioner was a psychiatrist and wanted to medicate me, and tried to then, over several months of therapy, tried to convince me that monasticism was my problem and that I should look into other things to do with my life. And which was a very interesting perspective, but not one I really agreed with or really wanted to pursue. So I took the medications for a while, just to give you all a kind of a background for where I'm coming from and why I'm talking on mental health in this situation. And I took them for about a year, actually, and began studying and trying to change my practice because I thought, the ideal of a monk is freedom, it's independence. And I didn't want to be dependent on a chemical or a drug. I couldn't see myself wandering around the Himalayas looking for a Walmart to get my monthly supply. So I wanted to go beyond that, but I also had a very significant local and present issue that had to be dealt with. I didn't like the fact, I certainly wasn't comfortable with the fact of being a monk who was depressed. That seemed very contradictory to me. That's not why I got involved in it, not what I was certainly hoping to reap from it. So the investigation began, and as I've done that, as I've continued on in this quest, I've come to find out that I'm not alone in this situation. I'm now a Swami, and I work very closely with Swami Atmajnananda at the Washington, D.C. Center, and travel around quite a bit to small groups that are starting Vedanta centers around the area. And as a Swami, kind of, I guess, probably pretty much like any minister or priest, people tend to come and open up or want answers to their problems or talk about their situations. And I have been quite surprised and quite concerned because it seems that depression is becoming almost an epidemic. So many people have come and talked about having these problems and these issues and getting really stuck. And at this point, I've even know of now 3 suicides that have happened. Only one of them was someone I knew directly, but the other 2 were family members who came to me, were members of a family whose family members came to me trying to heal from that situation, from that experience. And so I have really tried very hard to put together a very coherent and a very basic set of ideals that have worked for me, that have helped me to kind of stand up on my own, to deal with my own issues, and to come out of that shell and I'm not going to say that it's a curing situation, because I don't think depression for everybody is something that's, quote, curable. It's something that you have to, an obstacle that you have to learn to work with or carry with you, or to use to help you grow, to catapult you forward. But to have come to a place in my life where I feel like that's what it has become. It's become a catalyst for growth and a catalyst for investigation. I was reading the other day an article on depression, and it says that the more time young adults spend on social media, the more likely they are to become depressed, a study has found. Of the 19 to 32-year-olds who took the part in the research, those who checked social media most frequently throughout the week were 2.7 times more likely to develop depression than those who checked least often. The 1,787 U.S. participants used social media for an average of 61 minutes every day, visiting accounts 30 times per week. Of them, a quarter were found to have high indicators of depression. There is a potential vicious circle here. People who become depressed may turn to social media for support, but their excessive engagement with it might only serve to exacerbate their depression. So I mention that because the world has changed in the last 15, 20 years. I'm happy enough to be 50 at this point, which I like to call old, but I'm still the youngest one in the monastery. And but I've noticed in my life, as I've been watching from outside the windows of the monastery, the world has definitely changed. These phones and these tablets are everywhere and becoming a pervasive thing. And they're not necessarily helping us. No, I'm not to preach against them. I don't. I use them and I like them, as you can see. Yes, indeed. But that was good. So what I'm saying, I guess, is that they're not going to be the solution for your depression. Getting online and endlessly browsing and getting endlessly distracted, which is what the initial stages of depression really drive you to do, to kind of get lost in TV shows, lost in movies, lost in, Reddit accounts, whatever, just kind of whiling away and not dealing with things. That in itself is going to cause a sense of depression. For me in the monastery, and not just in the monastery, but in life, I always had this idea that I needed to do what it was I was sent to do. I have to become what I'm supposed to become. I'm supposed to achieve what I'm supposed to achieve. And the first 30 years of my life were this frantic searching for what it was that I was supposed to do, that I was supposed to accomplish. And when I stumbled onto Vedanta in a wonderful way in India, which is a whole story and lecture on its own, I thought I had found that thing, this thing that was going to save me and going to give me my real answer. And I got into it, and I found out that being a monk was nothing near the romantic experience that I was hoping for. I washed a lot of dishes, I scrubbed a lot of toilets, I weeded a lot of gardens, and I sat there in the basement of a monastery in San Francisco at 40 thinking, really? Is this the big thing that my life is supposed to be about, that's going to change, that's going to be my purpose, my mission? And that was synonymous with the time when depression really started coming over me. And I read this verse in the Gita, which I know everybody, well, at least many people that I know are familiar with. I'll read it to you, and it just talks about a cycle of life that we get caught in quite often. When a man thinks of the objects, attachment to them arises, and from attachment desire is born, and from desire anger arises. From anger comes delusion, and from delusion the loss of memory, and from the loss of memory the destruction of discrimination, and from the destruction of discrimination he perishes. But the self-controlled man moving amongst objects with the senses under restraint and free from attraction and repulsion attains to peace. This idea that the outside world kind of calls us into a relationship with it, and it becomes, we think that the things that we need are out there. I was fascinated when the story of the Garden of Eden was translated or told to me in a Vedantic fashion. That here you have Adam and Eve at peace in the garden, walking happily in the garden. And suddenly she sees this fruit, this forbidden fruit. And she looks at it, and the first thing that it says about it is that it looked pleasing to her eyes, that it pulled her out through the senses. Oh, that's nice. And then it looked like it would be good for food, that it would fill her, that would give her something, and that it would make her like God, that it would take her to that highest place. And you see that kind of three-step delusion happen there, boom, boom, boom. And then what was the consequence of that? They lost the garden. They were thrown out of that sense of peace, thrown out of that paradise. And the curse was what? The curse that God gave them, he said, now you will have to till and scratch at the earth for all the food that you will eat for the rest of your life, for all of your enjoyments. And then he further puts that cherubim with the flaming sword at the gate to protect them from entering that garden again. For what reason? So that they can't get back in the garden to eat the fruit of immortality. That's still in the garden, that fruit of foreverness. And I looked at that from the Vedantic perspective, and I was like, wow, that's cool. I like that. Going out through your senses, thinking that your purpose is going to lie out there, whether it's in objects or things to accomplish or things to do, is the first step to losing your paradise, the first step to losing your inner peace. And then to think that that actually is going to be the thing that's going to fulfill you, that's going to sustain you, is step two. And then to think that it's going to take you to the highest, that it's going to provide you with the fulfillment of the purpose of your life, is the final, And to follow that continuously, to keep working on that pattern over and over and over again, I think is what brought me to that place of depression, because I was doing that fervently for a long time and getting nowhere with it. And so what do? I'm going to try and in the next 15 minutes do almost what Dr. Long did in 30 minutes, take you through 2,000 years of history. I'm going to try to hit some very basic points of thinking. Now these will take practice. No Vedantic solution to anything is going to be something that you walk out with like being, oh, cool, finished. So these are all points of practice, perspectives that you have to work on and develop. But even knowing them and applying them to your condition will help you and will bring you to a more peaceful place. Swami Vivekananda, who came over to this country in the late 1800s, wrote some lessons on Raja Yoga. And he says in there this: the easiest way to get hold of the mind is to sit quiet, to let it drift where it will for a while. Hold fast to the idea, I am the witness watching my mind drifting. The mind is not I. Then see it. Think as if it were a thing entirely apart from yourself. Identify yourself with God, never with matter or with mind. Picture the mind as a calm lake stretched out before you, and the thoughts that come and go as bubbles rising on the surface. Make no effort to control the thought, but watch them, follow them in imagination as they float away. This will gradually lessen the circles, for the mind ranges over wide circles of thought, and those circles widen out into ever-increasing circles, as in a pond when we throw a stone. We want to reverse the process and start with a huge circle, make it narrower until at last we fix the mind on one spot and make it stay there. Hold to this idea. I am not the mind. I see that I am thinking. I am watching my mind act, and each day the identification of yourself with thought and feeling will grow less, until at last you can entirely separate yourself from the mind and actually know it to be apart from yourself. This was the first piece of information that I really would say was my saving grace in dealing with depression. When you are identified with mind, you say things like, I'm depressed. You say things like, I'm angry. You say things like, I'm jealous, I'm frustrated, I'm lonely. And it feels dark, and it feels like you're in a bowl. You can't see over the edge. You forget that you weren't always like this. It feels like you've always been like this, and it looks like you're always going to be like this. And in this scenario, which is not positing a way of thinking, it's demonstrating the reality of what you are and how you're put together. You are not the mind. Your mind is a lens in front of you that you're looking through and experiencing the senses through, experiencing an possibly external world for yourself. And the idea behind that is that that allows you to say, the mind is depressed. I'm not depressed. The mind is angry. I'm not angry. The mind is jealous. The mind is disturbed. The mind is frustrated. I am not. You can establish that place as witness, where you understand I am the watcher of the mind. The mind plays for me. And that allows me to not have to experience directly the moods of the mind. I can see it come and go, but I can act and be independent of it. So that yes, I can be angry, but that doesn't mean I have to yell. I can see that anger. I don't have to own it. Like that, and you begin to get that space in there. Now, there's a second way of going forward in this freedom, or of this idea of self, and that is to remember who you are. There is, let's see here, the one luminous thought of the Advaita, that there is but one infinite existence, that Sat Chit Ananda, existence, knowledge, and bliss absolute, and that this is the innermost nature of man, and as such, the soul of man is, in essence, eternally free and divine, all manifestations being but the varying expressions of this nature of the soul. Okay, we bring the second piece in. So if you're not mind, if you're just a witness watching the mind, and you can only say the mind is angry, the mind is depressed, the mind is frustrated, what are you going to put in its place? Are you just going to become nothing? Just kind of sit there watching, like you're watching television all your life, nothing going on inside. The scriptures say, no, what will happen once that separation begins to happen? Something that is the real you will begin to manifest. And the last thing that the sages are able to say about this knowledge, about this self, about this being, before they merge into that infinite bliss of enlightenment, are three things. Sat Chit Ananda. It's love. It's love itself. Your nature is love. It's intelligent. It thinks. It's reasonable. And it exists. It's present. Always present. Fully available. So you've got those three things that you're allowed to say about yourself. That's how you can determine what is true. You can say, I'm loving. You can say, I'm intelligent. You can say, I'm present. Those things you can say as many times as you want and identify with them as closely as you like. Those are the truth. The things that are not true are the things that say, I'm angry. The things that say, I'm jealous. The things that say, I'm depressed. I'm worthless. I'm afraid. I'm lonely. Those are the lies of mind. Your truth is your Sat Chit Ananda. I am loving. That's why I enjoy loving. That's why I enjoy giving. That's why Christmas is fun. I'm intelligent. That's why I'm learning. That's why I'm growing up. That's why I'm maturing. That's why I'm understanding. And I'm present. I've always been present. The sages say that's a whole other talk, but it's my favorite one, this idea that this moment is eternal. It's had no beginning and it has no end. It's the same moment that the Jesus inhabited, that the Buddha inhabited, that Krishna and Rama inhabited, and now you're inhabiting it, this one eternal moment, which is a manifestation of those three things, a manifestation of love, a manifestation of intelligence, a manifestation of being in it. So in this internal dialogue that we're drawn into all the time as we watch this world happen in front of us, as we try to be quiet enough to let this inner nature of loving and being and knowing manifest itself? What does the dialogue look like? Because it gets messy in there sometimes. You know, that accusatory voice comes in there. Oh God, I'm always messing things up. You know, you have a fight with your mother and you're rude to her and you're like, oh my God, I always am so mean to my mom. Or, you know, you fail your test and it's like, oh God, I'm so stupid. Why am I always doing things like this? You know, or you're lonely and immediately Friday night comes along and you don't have any plans. You're like, God, everybody else has plans. I never have any plans. Why doesn't anybody want to do anything with me? You know, why am I such an awful person? And you start getting these complexes, and these things start to infect the mind and start to invade your sense of self. So you've got to separate that sense of mind, putting it aside. You've got to, again, let this evocative thought of what you are arise. But then you also have to guard the inner voices. I'm going to pull from the Vedantic scripture of 1 Corinthians 13 at this moment, only because this scripture says it really the best. I love it. St. Paul is writing, and he says, if I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move the mountains, but I don't have love, I am nothing. If I give everything that I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. Aside from being one of the most beautiful thoughts you could have, this is a direct description of what you are in your purest nature, that Satchitananda. This is a description of that Ananda in its verb form. This is an expression of what you are. So you can use this idea. You can take all of these things and list them out, put them on your mirror in the morning, and sit there when you're shaving or when you're putting your lipstick on, or both. And you can say, I'm patient, I'm kind. I don't keep a record of wrongs. I always hope, I always help, I always believe, I always trust. You know, you can take that approach. That's the external approach. Now the internal approach, and this was the one that was most helpful to me, is I thought that if this is my nature, then any voice that exercises within my mind has to obey these rules. If my mind is going to address me, if I'm going to have to listen to the voices and the things that it has to say, I will hold it to this ideal. It cannot accuse me. It cannot say anything that makes me weaker. It cannot say anything to me that inspires me to feel less about myself or to respect others less. It's not able to say things to me in a disrespectful way. It's not able to call me stupid. It's not able to call me an idiot. It's not able to call me a failure. That it has to always hope in me. It has to always believe in me. It cannot keep a record of wrongs about me. It cannot add these things together and attack me, and I don't have to listen to it. So when that internal voice is saying, oh God, you're so stupid, say, look, you're not going to talk to me that way. You're not going to talk to me that way. I'm not stupid. I'm intelligence itself. That's my nature. You know, when it sits there and says, oh God, you're so selfish. You always say the wrong thing. You can't talk to me that way. I'm not selfish. I'm love itself, and I will express it. You know, so you learn to take that, to check those inner voices and to check the accuracy of what the mind is saying, so that you don't fall victim to your own self, to your own wrong thinking. Now, all of these ideas, you know, I wish I could say they were all original, but a lot of these came out of a series of methods called cognitive behavioral therapy. You know, that's the scientific name for these things. that you go and you take a look at your mind, and you check what it says. What are your core beliefs in there, and are they true? You know, do people really always hate you? Do you really always say the wrong thing? Are you really stupid in all situations? Are you really bad at everything that you try? Are you really a failure? To go through these things and to catch them, become aware. That's the first part of it. That's the first part that Vivekananda is talking about. You see, so it's a multi-step process. The first thing is to stand as the witness. Watch the words of the mind go by. Watch the thoughts go by. Become aware of what you think. Become aware of scenarios that are there. Become aware of the randomness of it all. Because there's one truth about the mind that is quite surprising, I think, to most people. The mind is just an organ, and it excretes thought. It excretes thought like your sweat glands sweat, like your hair, whatever they are, grows hair. And your mind just keeps putting out thought, one after the other, one after the other, one after the other. And what will surprise you is that the mind cannot have an original thought. The thought in your mind is always determined by the previous thought. There's always a relationship. They just spin around, boom, 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 boom. And from this constant stream of thinking, of related thoughts, one after the other, you choose and grab ones that you like. They're all there. You've thought about murder, you've thought about rape, you've thought about wealth, you've longed for someone else's money, all those things, but you don't identify with those. You don't go around saying, I'm a murderer, hopefully. You don't identify with those things. Why? Because you're like, oh, those aren't me. What you've got to come to understand is none of them are you. Stop grabbing any of those thoughts and saying, oh, that one is mine. Oh, that one's me. Because they're not. They're random thoughts, one following another, one following another, one following another. And you define them by owning them. And when you own them, it's like putting a battery to the light. They become powerful at that point. That thought comes across, I'm handsome. You grab it, oh yeah, I like that one. And suddenly you've got this light. Changes the way that you walk down the street. It changes the way you interpret what people say to you. I had this wonderful experience when I was a young brahmachari in San Francisco, walking down Union Street one day. And I thought I noticed several people kind of catching my eye, like they were looking at me. And I was vain enough at the time to think, oh, I must be pretty good looking. I felt pretty good about myself and walked down. The very next day, and this is not made up for illustration, this really happened. The very next morning I woke up and there was this giant pimple on my cheek right about here. And I tried to take care of it, as many of us do, and I failed miserably, and it turned into this purple, horrible, hideous thing. And that afternoon, I was walking down the same street and noticed people looking at me. And I caught myself thinking, oh my God, they're looking at my pimple on my face. Is it bleeding? Checking it out. And it hit me, because I like to think about these things. Wow, look at that. I took the same input, the same thing that was happening. People are looking at me. And I interpreted it in two radically different ways that made me feel radically different about who I was and what I was. One was sort of positive. If being proud of your looks, which will end someday anyway, is a good thing, then that was positive. If feeling bad about yourself is negative, that was negative. But you see how it was arbitrary. And from that, you can divine the fact that by the thoughts that you identify with, by the things that you choose to hold on to, they become the lens through which you see the present moment. And then this present moment will determine your level of happiness. And if you live like that, what you're going to fall into is the cycle that we started with from the Gita. Round and round and round and round and round. As long as you get what you like, you're going to be happy. If you don't, you're going to feel angry about it. If you start getting angry about it, that's going to give rise here from that whole thing comes delusion. You say all kinds of things when you're angry. Just the whole world rises up to support how just and right you are in your anger, no matter how much of a jerk you're being. The loss of memory, the destruction of discrimination, you just get caught up in it. You can't see things straight. Your anger makes you do and say things that just aren't right. I can remember my neighbor screaming at me one day, and I thought about, scraping his car at night. I thought about that for months. I kept thinking like, and then I was removing the paint from my cabinets in my apartment, And I thought, I could just go splash some of that on his hood, you know? It's like, and you catch yourself thinking things like that. It's like, that's the nature of anger. That's how it makes you lose your judgment. You get all caught up in it. It changes your identity of who you are. You become delusional in your thinking. Something small becomes huge and then bigger and then bigger. And you can't forgive it because you've got this wrong sense of self that now needs to be protected, this ego that now needs to be guarded, that can't say it's sorry, that can't walk away from it, you know, and you get caught in that cycle. So the way out of that, in a quick summary, 1-minute summary, know that you are not your mind. Know that what you are is Satchitananda. I'm loving, I'm intelligent, I'm present. Enforce that and hold your mind to the standard of love in the way that it talks about you and in the way that it talks about others. And challenge it when it tries to see things differently. Because only an ego needs protection. Only an ego needs to attack. And what is the ego? The ego is when you stop believing that you're Satchitananda and you start identifying with a temporary thought. And from that grows your insecurity. From in that grows a temporary sense of I that will always be hungry, that will always need to be fed, that will always need to be maintained, and will never give you a moment's peace. When people like you, you'll feel good about yourself. When they don't, you won't. When you get a good grade, you'll be happy. When you get a bad one, you won't. And round and round and round you will go. So take these ideas, practice them, sit with them. They're not difficult ones. The sages say that they are what you are, that it's not just a way of thinking. So experiment with it, poke at it, and see how it works for you in becoming the person that you want to be.
5-10 minutes for questions. Okay.
So in terms of mental illness like depression, anxiety, etc., like how in this sense can we think about balancing accountability that is not self-abuse and on the other pole, self-care that is not self-indulgent?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, a lot of the objectivity comes in separating out from mind. You know, once that separation begins to really kind of come to fruition a little bit, when a lot of the spinning that has the momentum, I guess, that you've established by identifying with those things to die out, you get a more even keel view of things. You know, you get a less obstructed view of what's going on. The thing about the nature of love, if you run those things through your mind and hold your mind to those accountable, to hold yourself accountable to that kind of thinking, self-indulgence will take care of itself. Now, self-indulgence may be necessary at first. You know, for someone with mental illness, a lot of times there's a lot of self-abuse that has to heal. And it just doesn't disappear when you begin watching the mind. So there is a time where love has to be giving to you, and you have to learn to take care of yourself. You have to learn to be kind to yourself. You have to learn to be patient with yourself. And during that time, that's fine. When that time ends, you will now know how to be patient with someone else because you've learned how to be patient with yourself. You learned how to be kind to someone else because you've learned how to be kind with yourself. You see, because the way that you treat yourself in your own mind is going to be the way you're going to treat others around you. And so by practicing this internally, it will manifest externally. That's why I like to stick with principles on these things, because if you're doing the right thing in principle, the right thing in particular will manifest. You're going to become a loving person if you're thinking about love. And you're thinking about being a person who always hopes, always believes, always encourages, is always kind, is always, doesn't hold a record of wrongs. If you hold yourself to those kinds of standards, that's the kind of person you're going to become. And so at first, yes, a lot of the part of the journey is learning to treat yourself that way. That's why Jesus says, love your neighbor as you love yourself. If you're rude to yourself, you can't be nice to your neighbor. If you have a low opinion of yourself, you can't respect your neighbor. If you're afraid of your own feelings and ideas and darkness, you're not going to be able to help your neighbor. So it starts with taking care of the self. And as that comes to its maturity, the self-indulgence takes care of itself. All right, wonderful.
I had a question.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that study about use of social media and how it might cause depression. Is there a more positive role for modern technologies and social media?
Yes. Swami Prabhupada and I had this conversation, and actually, I spoke at Bellarmont on this also when cell phones were first kind of coming around. There was a big debate on, do Swamis carry cell phones? And Swami Prabhupada was a very wise man in my eyes, and I had a conversation over lunch one day about this, because I asked him, and he said, see, as long as you understand that the computer is for you, and you are not for the computer, you'll be okay. The computer is a tool. The phone is a tool. As long as you're using it to accomplish what you want to do, that's fine. When you don't any longer have a purpose for it and it's using you, you can't put it down, you can't let it go, you don't have a designed purpose for it, you don't have a distinct need for it, you're not using it as a tool, you're just holding the hammer and kind of gazing at the hammer. That's when it becomes a problem. And you can know, by how do you use it in your life? Use it to communicate with your friends. Sure, I'm going to be at Joe's Pizza at 3 o'clock. Come on by. But then to constantly pick it up and scroll through and check on what your friends are doing every 3.5 minutes, that's not adding. That's not you using it. That's it using you. That's it drawing you into itself. So have your boundaries. Decide what your boundaries are. That's the safest way to know. For myself, I have two. I'm not allowed to browse the web, the news in the morning until after I've done my studies. And so I make sure that that's the first one, because I noticed before, after breakfast, I'd go up and I'd flick on the tablet, and I'd get caught in one thing, and then I'd end up at that dreaded Reddit, where I would be there for days looking at one kitten after another, oh my God. And then I'd forget my studies. And the second rule is that I don't turn on electronics after 9:30 p.m. because I also found that I was losing sleep because I would stay entertained and awake, and then when I put it down, my mind was in this weird kind of vibratory state that took me an hour to bring down to go to sleep. So those are my two rules. I don't do it until I accomplish what I need to after breakfast, and I don't use it after 9:30 p.m. So that's just an example. So set your boundaries and stick to them, and that way you'll be safe from being used by your technology. Ram.
Swamiji, to me it seems like you're advising us not to get trapped in ego, in ahankara and mamakara. But then what I've noticed is sometimes when people are in this state, they become so closely attached to their thoughts or to the thing that is really causing them that issue. So how, when someone is so deeply entangled in that sort of a situation, how does one come out of it slowly?
Just like that, slowly is the word. The Sri Sharda Devi says, you have to pull the thread off of the spool in the same way that you rolled it on. So a problem that took you 20 years to develop might take you 20 years to come out of. Now, that's not a rule, but it's an understanding that these things have to be practiced. Attachment comes from misunderstanding. Attachment comes from narrow thinking. You think, the truth of the matter, as the sages present the world, is that anything you desire in this world, anything you're attracted to in this world, is somehow reflecting God back to you, reflecting your true nature back to you. And you're mistaking that reflection for the thing itself. So you try and go grab that thing to own it. As long as you believe that that thing is the thing that you're going after, there's no cure for that. So what you have to do is come to understand that that's not what you're looking for. And you do that through discrimination. I'll give you a graphic example. If there's someone handsome or beautiful that you're walking down the street, you see them, you're suddenly, wow, really like that person. I think I'm going to go try and meet them, right? Stop and say, okay, what is it that you are wanting from that person? What's drawing you to them? You know, is it a body part? So imagine taking a knife and going over and being able to take any body part you want. Is that going to be it? Obviously not. That's gross, right? That's not it. So it's not a body part. Well, is it the whole body that you're looking for? So lay that body dead on the street. Now you can have it if you want it. You can go take that dead body home. Suddenly, no, that's not what I want. So it wasn't a body part. It's not the whole body itself. What is it that I'm attracted to? Is there personality? You don't know you don't know anything about that personality. It's not the personality at all. Well, what is it that you were trying to find in that person? It was what is alive in them. It's what makes them a person. It's that living force that you were looking for. Because without that, nothing else was valuable. Nothing else was desirable. So understand that. Wow, that living force that's in that body, that person is already here. What was it I was trying to find out there? You discriminate like that. You take a look at it and understand. You also widen your boundaries. You know, you think, oh, Friday night, I'm going to go out and party and get totally bombed. Well, just stop thinking about the period of time that you're totally bombed. Bring that boundary out a little bit and remember the next morning last Saturday when you said, oh my God, I'm never going to do that again. You know, remember the whole picture. Understand that in the world, there's a rule. For as much pleasure as you will get as much pain to match. It always comes in equal measure. So when you look at situations, bring the boundaries out to include the pain, to understand the full effect of what that activity has on you. And through that educating your mind, through that getting a vision and understanding the nature of your thinking, you'll slowly begin to realize the spiritual nature of what you're looking for and begin to understand that you carry that within you. And that, as Sri Nisargadatta says, do you not understand that it is your quest for happiness that itself prevents your happiness? You know? All right. Now, I talked about God a lot, just one sentence. All of this can be secularized to any level that you want to secularize it to. You don't have to use that language or that syntax if you're not comfortable with it at all. These ideas can be talked about in any religious form, any religious language, or any scientific language. Just pick your own vocabulary and plug it in. But since it is a true situation about what you are and what your experiences will be and how they work, it will function at any level. So, good luck.